the antichrist? When will the tribulation begin? Where will all that take place? And what do we need to look for in order to know that the tribulation has begun? These are some of the questions we'll be answering today in response to a question that one of our viewers asked on our last video. So in the course of our last video, we were looking at some issues related to Revelation chapter 6. And you can check that video, you can look at that video in our YouTube channel. But during the course of that chapter, Revelation chapter 6, one of the persons who looked at that video asked this question. I believe we want to answer his question. His question was, what is going to be the start of Daniel's 70th week? Once again, what is going to be the start of Daniel's 70th week? It's a very good question. So I want to thank this person who looked at the video and asked the question. Very good question. So let's attempt to answer that in this video today. So first of all, we need to know what is this person referring to when he talks about Daniel's 70th week. And to answer that, we need to go back into the Old Testament. In the book of Daniel, with the prophet Daniel, in that book he used this phrase. Daniel chapter 9 and verse 24. This is what that verse says in the English Standard Version. An angel speaking to Daniel is saying, 70 weeks are decreed upon your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. An angel speaking to Daniel is giving him this prophecy. And he told Daniel in a nutshell, God has put aside, he has determined or decreed that he is going to spend 70 weeks in accomplishing everything that he has planned for the people of Israel. And so the last week of that time frame will be the 70th week. And this is where this person who viewed the video got the term Daniel's 70th week from. So God predicted that this would happen through the angel, that he would deal with Israel for 70 weeks. Now in Bible prophecy, generally a day is taken as or to represent a year. So if there's 70 weeks, that totals, if you do the maths, that totals to be 480 years. So God told Daniel that he will take a period of 480 years to complete everything that he had in mind to do with respect to Israel. When you read chapter 9, verse 24, verse 25, and verse 26, you see the angel explaining to Daniel, and essentially in those verses, we could conclude that 483 of those years, 473 of those years have already been completed. You read verses 24, 25, and 26, you'll see that. So the last 7 years are still to be completed. Or in other words, the last week, the 70th week, is still to be completed. And this is the question this person is asking. What is going to be the start of those last 7 years of this prophecy? That's what we want to get into today. In verse 27 of Daniel chapter 9, it tells us what will take place in these last 7 years. This prophecy that the angel gave to Daniel. And this is what the angel said, Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27. And he says, and he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. And for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. Very interesting verse, and we'll try to break that down in this video. So the angel is explaining to Daniel what is going to happen in these last 7 years. Now we today generally call these 7 years the tribulation period. That's a term people generally use. But as we'll see a little later on, the Bible has Jesus has some specific terms for it. So we'll speak about that in the next few minutes. So the question then is, when will this last 7 years of the prophecy begin? So let's begin to analyze this prophecy and get a sense of what's going on. So he says again in verse 27, Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, and he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. When the angel says he shall make a covenant, who is he? Who is the angel referring to? Well, if you read the context, in that context there, in the previous verse 26, the angel was speaking about a leader or a prince who came from the Roman Empire, a Roman prince, a Roman leader. And so this person who is going to come has to essentially come from that area where the Roman Empire functioned. He has to come out from that area when you read the context. But then also, when we read Revelation chapter 18, we see that the Bible explains there that this person who we generally call the antichrist, the Bible calls him the beast. Revelation 18 explains that he will have a kingdom which is called a Babylon kingdom. It comes from Babylon. It has that kind of characteristics. So Daniel tells us that this person, this leader who's going to come, will come from that Roman origin, that area controlled by the Romans. And then in Revelation, the Bible gives us a little more information and tells us that the characteristics of this leader, this beast, or this antichrist will be Babylonian characteristics. So when you look at where Rome was, the countries Rome ruled over, and the countries that Babylon ruled over, we could easily conclude that the common area with those two empires, the Babylonian Empire and the Roman Empire, is today the area called Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, also the West Bank, and even the Gaza Strip. These areas are the areas that are common to both Roman and Babylonian empires, which Daniel spoke about and which Revelation spoke about. So this person who's going to come, this leader who's going to come, according to the prophecy in Daniel, is going to come from this area. Once again, area around Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, that particular area there. And one of the interesting things is that area is heavily populated by Muslims, but more specifically, both Sunni and Shia Muslims. So that's one of the first clues there. The Bible is telling us that this world leader is going to come from this specific region with this specific demographic of people, heavily populated by Shia and Sunni Muslims. And so we go on. The Antichrist, therefore, we could conclude from just looking at these verses in Daniel and Revelation 18, the Antichrist or the beast will be a radical Islamic leader who will have control or influence in the Middle East region, that same region where Iraq and Syria and these other countries are located. So when we begin to talk about these 7 years and the Daniel's 70th week, what we are looking for and what we need to keep our eyes on is a radical Islamic leader who has influence or control in the Middle East, rising to global power, rising to global dominance, and may not necessarily be leading or ruling the entire world, but having a very control over a very large amount of people and influence over a very large amount of countries, large amount of nations. But it will be a person coming out from that area. And then it says in Daniel chapter 9 that he will make a strong covenant with people, with many people for 1 week. A strong covenant. What is this strong covenant about? Well, in the context again, Revelation chapter 9, in the context, especially the verse before, verse 26, there was reference to war and fighting against Israel. So the covenant that this leader that is going to come, we call him the Antichrist, the covenant will be a peace covenant. Instead of fighting against Israel and Israel fighting against other people, other countries, this leader is going to come and somehow get peace between Israel and its enemies, the people who are opposing it. He will be able to get peace or bring peace. And the Bible even gives some more information in other scriptures. If we read in Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, Jesus talks about a time called the Great Tribulation that is going to come. And he says it will come after the abomination of desolation takes place. The phrase abomination of desolation, a very technical term, but what it simply means, it refers to a time where the beast, or the person we call the antichrist, will set up an image, an idol of himself. But he also will go in the temple, not only place an image of himself in the temple, but he will go in the temple and he will demand that we worship, that the people who is there at that time would worship him. And so the abomination of desolation refers to the time when this beast or antichrist will set up the image of himself in the temple of God. Jesus says, when that time happens, then will begin great tribulation. But before that, there will not be as much problems. That's very interesting. Now, not only that, but when we read in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3, Paul says that there will be a time of peace. And when there's that time of peace, then after that will come, according to him, sudden destruction. So Jesus says apparently there'll be a time of some peace. But then when the abomination of desolation takes place, then there'll be great tribulation. Paul, 1 Thessalonians 5:3 says there'll be peace, but then there'll be problems, sudden destruction. In Revelation chapter 11 verse 3, the Bible says that God will send 2 witnesses in Israel, and they would prophesy for 3.5 years, actually half of the 7 years. And after those 3.5 years, the Bible says that the beast or the antichrist will kill the 2 witnesses, and then Satan will go after Israel in a greater persecution. So again in Revelation 11, it seems to be saying that there's some measure of peace so that the 2 witnesses could function, they could prophesy, but then there's war after that 3.5 years. And this peace period comes because of this agreement that the antichrist, who is going to be a radical Islamic leader, he is going to be able to get that agreement made between Israel and her enemies. And so we see that peace there. The verse in Revelation, in Daniel chapter 9 verse 27, says that that peace will be for 1 week. 1 week in Bible prophecy, a day for a year. So that is really 7 days. In other words, 7 years. We generally call that tribulation period. But when you read in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 21, Jesus calls the second half of that period great tribulation. Not just tribulation, but great. It's very interesting. In Daniel chapter 9 verse 27, the angel says, for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. In other words, for the first half of that 7 years, for 3.5 years, the Antichrist or the beast is going to allow Israel to function how they are accustomed to. But beginning in the middle point, 3.5 years, at that point, he's going to break his agreement, and he's going to cause the sacrifices and the worship in the temple, Israel temple, to stop. And at that point is where he will really begin to bring persecution against Israel. But the agreement will stop. That's what Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 says. Daniel 9 says, on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate. It's a very technical term. So what does that mean? The term or the phrase wing of abomination, when you study the language there, may refer to an area in the temple where this idol, which is called an abomination, will be set up. So the temple, which will be rebuilt in Israel, in that temple, an idol or an image of the beast. Idols are called abominations, things that God hates. An idol will be set up in the temple. And that idol, when it is set up in the temple, that will actually take place at that midpoint of the 7 years, at that 3.5 year point. That is when that will take place. And because of that, the Bible says, on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate. The person who makes desolate is the Antichrist. What that means is, because he will set up his image, his idol of himself in the temple, he will desecrate the temple. And he will go against Israel in persecution. And that is what that part of the verse means. So that midpoint is very interesting. Well, a lot of things will change. And then Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 goes on and it says, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. Again, very interesting word. But what that means is, God has decreed or determined what he wants to accomplish with Israel, with the Antichrist himself, and also with the place, Jerusalem, the city Jerusalem, and the land of Israel. And so, when God has accomplished everything he wants to accomplish with these three things, Israel, the beast or the Antichrist, and the place, the land, Jerusalem, and the land of Israel, after everything is accomplished, then this prophecy will come to an end. God will ensure that he does all of that within that 7-year period. And so we need to sum it up. There's going to come up or arise a radical Islamic leader out from that Middle East area where Syria, Jordan, Israel, Lebanon, Gaza Strip, and the West Bank, where that area is, there will come a radical Islamic leader who is not only Islamic but military, doing warfare and having a lot of influence over not just that area but apparently over a wider area in the Middle East, having a lot of influence not only in that but even with the European Union and other countries. And because of his influence, he will be able to get peace and agreement between Israel and its enemies. And when that happens, Israel and her enemies will have peace for some period of time. And it seems that agreement will involve what we call a two-state solution, where the Palestinians would have their own state, a statehood, their own land, their own people recognized by international law and recognized by Israel. And where Israel will also have its land, its temple, where it could do its worship. So how do we answer this question then? What is going to be, let's ask the question, let me repeat the question. What is going to be the start of Daniel's 70th week? In other words, what is going to be the beginning of this tribulation period? How do we know that the tribulation has begun? What are we to look for? This is the answer. Daniel's 70th week would begin when a radical Islamic leader who has military power in the Middle East negotiates a 7-year peace agreement between Israel and other nations, which will include, number one, a ceasefire between Israel and its Arab neighbors. Number two, freedom of worship for Israel in its temple at Jerusalem. And number three, a recognized state for Palestinians. In other words, a two-state solution to the problems. When this happens, that is how we can have a strong indication that the tribulation has begun. This last 7 years, or the 70th week of Daniel, has begun. Let me just say, we have been studying the book of Revelation, and in studying this, one of the conclusions we have come to is that this event will take place after we as a church have been raptured. Revelation chapter 4, when you read that, you get some understanding there, as well as other chapters, other verses in the Bible. But after we are taken up, then this will happen. But how do we know, or how would we know the tribulation has begun? When we see this radical Islamic leader rise to power and negotiate this peace with Israel. And so I'm hoping that this answers the question. Thank you once again to the person who looked at the video and commented and asked the question. It's a very good question, and I'm hoping that this answer suffices what you wanted. And if everyone else looking at this video, I'm hoping that this has been of some help to you. The notes for this will also be uploaded with this video on YouTube or whatever the platform you're looking at this on. So you can check the notes, download it, keep it as a free copy for yourself, for your own personal study. But thank you once again for viewing, and we will be continuing our look in Revelation 6. We'll be going into the next video, continuing our study into the book of Revelation. So join me in that. But for now, thank you very much. Take care. God bless. And we'll see you in the next one.